this is Hooked by Happenstance. I'm Kendra, and it is time for Chapter 8 of Yarn Tales. Yarn Tales is my ongoing series here at Hooked by Happenstance where I read books, I tell you about them, and then I apply some silly Kendra rules to my rating of the book, and I add a segment to my reading shawl that I am making as kind of a book log, and also as a way to encourage my reading by creating a tangible product from the process of getting the knowledge of the book into my brain. Now, it might be kind of awkwardly lit today because it's super, super bright outside. There's snow covering everything. And you might hear my wind chimes because it's also crazy windy out there, which is perfect setting for the book that I read, 3 or 4 weeks ago, called Let It Snow. Let It Snow is a book by Maureen Johnson, John Green, and Lauren Miracle, and it is getting adapted for a streaming service, I believe. The way that I came about this book, I follow all things Vlogbrothers, which means I end up following all things Green Brothers, that being John and Hank, for those of you that do not know. And I heard about this book by looking into books that John Green had written. I got into the Vlogbrothers having never read any of John's books, like The Fault in Our Stars is probably the one that most people are most familiar with, but there are a number of others. The most recent one that I read was Turtles All the Way Down. So I, have been trying to work my way through his catalog, but honestly, his books, I enjoy reading them because I like having the background knowledge for all of the other content I consume of his. But the books don't necessarily appeal directly to me, or the whole of them does not, because a lot of them are, young romances. There's some things about this, writing style that is not necessarily my favorite. But I do like when you can tell the author's voice is coming through, and in some of his books it's real heavy, in a good way in some of them, and in an amusing way in others. So, I heard about this book more recently, and it was brought back to my attention actually from a Vlogbrothers video, because John Green made a video about how the adaptation of Let It Snow is being marketed as a John Green book, when it is a book equally written by 3 authors. And he was talking about how, his name is probably most easily associated with it because he's probably the most Googleable, but he's the most Googleable because they associate his name with it, and how that's a vicious cycle. And so basically he was trying to just say, hey, it's not just my book, I made this with my friends, it was a good experience, here's what's up. And I was like, okay, well, I'd like to read it. I had never read anything by Lauren Miracle or Maureen Johnson. I have seen content of Maureen Johnson's on things like Project for Awesome and other videos on YouTube, and I enjoy her personality, and I think she's hilarious on Twitter. When I do see those tweets, I don't do Twitter, but I read Twitter. Anyways, it's a thing. So I decided when I was looking for an ebook to read that this might be a good idea, because it's something that I wanted to take part in before the adaptation came out, just because I knew there'd be more conversation around it again once that happens. So the way I did experience this book was via ebook. It is the first book I have ever read via ebook on my phone. I have read a couple, I just thought of it. I think it's the first one ever, but I just realized that I've read 2 or 3 on the computer, as the double page format, PDFs, before it was really an app thing. There were several books that I've wanted to do for school with my kids that were only available in those kind of formats, more like scans of old books, rather than books that were made in an electric format on purpose. So, this is the first, I'm sitting on my phone, I'm swiping a book, though I usually tappy because it hurts my finger less. Anyways, if you read ebooks, then you have these kind of problems too, deciding, if I'm laying in bed, how do I have to move the least but move my book forward? How little can I move? How lazy can I be? So I started reading the book, and I was reading it in, whatever free time I have. I have made a point now to keep an ebook on my phone all the time, and if I notice that I am mindlessly just clicking through apps, or I'm just mindlessly checking, it's you should be reading, Kendra. So it's always there. It's if you click on something twice, that means you need to open the ebook and you just need to be reading an ebook. That's what you need to be doing if you're going to be on your phone, or you need to go do something else. It's like a good way to like break that click, click, click cycle of the phone. So I started reading it, and it's 3 stories, and they're intertwined. They're all based on a giant snowstorm that happens, and it involves like some people on a train during the snowstorm, and then what happens to them and the people they end up interacting with because of this storm. So it's 3 stories again, but there's this like intermingling characters that kind of pick up throughout the whole book. So it's one overarching story with 3 separate stories within it. So the first story is by Maureen Johnson, and I really, really liked it. It was a kind of fantastical, realistic, they're all realistic fiction, but kind of a fantastical story of a girl and how she ends up in this scenario. Her parents are a little weird. Her name is Jubilee, and her parents are really into these Christmas figurines, and it's a funny premise. And she ends up meeting a guy through circumstances, and you know, the usual, like, kind of meet cute, just the process that happens. One thing that I did find notable at one point in that story, there's a lot of mention of playing Mousetrap, and my kids have been very into playing Mousetrap. Not playing Mousetrap, playing with Mousetrap as part of other machines they're building, because Mousetrap is a terrible game. It's not fun, but the Mousetrap board has a lot of options that are fun, and they discover the same thing in the story, which I just think is kind of amusing. So that story I really, really liked. In fact, it's really made me want to read some more Maureen Johnson. I have a bunch of them on my wish list coming up. I think the first one I'm going to read of hers coming up is going to be, what, 13 Blue Envelopes? And I have not picked any Lauren Miracle stuff, but there's always some more John Green stuff coming down the pike as I get to it, because I'm still trying to read all of his books. So there's the Maureen Johnson component. Then the next story is a John Green story, which I didn't really enjoy. There's a lot of banter between 2 like teenage guys. So the premise of that story is 2 teenage guys and their female friend who they treat like a guy, having like teenage tension, you know, hanging out, doing their thing, and then of course a love story ensues, because heaven forbid you ever make a story about teenage guys who are friends with a teenage girl and somebody doesn't like somebody. It's a trope that's just obnoxious, but whatever. But the main problem I had with that story was actually that I don't know that it's aged well. This book has been out for a while, and by a while I mean like over a decade, I think. But the way that the teenage boys talk really bothered me. I did not like the language. I did not like their interaction. Like, I just didn't think that they were, I don't know, being respectful of other people. Like, they talked in the way that I guess teenage boys talk, but I feel like we should be encouraging teenagers and people in general to not talk in those ways. And if we just keep making media that promotes acting certain ways, we're just saying that culturally it's okay. And I find that to be a problem. Like, I get using it to show the problems in society and how we should change it, but I felt like this story was not trying to do this. It was just trying to promote, like, an accurate portrayal of these characters, and I feel like maybe we would all benefit from accurately portraying people better, because people can be doing better with how they talk and how they interact, and if we have more media that shows people doing better, people will emulate doing better. So that just bothered me about the story. It kept taking me out of it. It just kept annoying me. I wanted to keep smacking them upside the head, and if I had been the female friend in this story, which I've been that female friend in a group like that, I would have smacked them upside the head and been like, hey, you can do better, be better people, that should be what we're striving for. And I have many a male friend that I grew up with that will tell you they literally were smacked upside the head and told that. So that was that. That story I just didn't really enjoy. The third story I found a little overbearing. It was centered around a group of female friends and one of the girls and her self-centeredness, and she was just obnoxiously self-centered. And I don't know if you were supposed to read it and like see yourself in it and feel self-centered by reading all of this and it making you uncomfortable to a point where you have to like look at your own baggage and your own ways of acting, and if like I'm supposed to have felt uncomfortable and disliked this portion because I dislike these portions of myself. Like, that might be reading way too much into this story. Or if I just read it and I was like, you are super self-centered and the story is becoming self-indulgent and too much. Because that's very much how it was. But it was still like an enjoyable read. That part, I mean, I read it faster because I was like, okay, I want to be done dealing with you because as a person, as a character, I don't like you. And not that she was unlikable and did things wrong, but more like, I feel like there's going to be a moral to this story. Can we just get to it and find out how the stories wrap up? But overall, I mean, the book was enjoyable enough. The nice thing was I was never drawn into it where I was like, I must sit down and read this book, which can happen sometimes, especially in books where they intertwine. Like, if you really want to know like how this detail is going to become important later, you can tell. You're like reading through really quick, or you can't put it down because you want to see those interactions. The points where the stories do come together is always the best part of these like separate but together stories. But yeah, I never had that with this, which was nice because it meant that the book didn't like overtake my life. And for it being an ebook, so a book that I had to physically read, I couldn't do anything else while I was reading it. So it was good that it wasn't all consuming ever. But now, the part that you're probably waiting for is what did I think of the book overall? Well, I was trying to figure out, how does one rate a book when there's multiple components? Like, I haven't really thought about that yet because I haven't read any books like this, and I'm actually looking at in the future reading some anthologies. Like, I don't exactly know. So I decided that what I guess I do is I kind of rate all 3 stories and then I average that, and so that gave this book an average rating of 3 stars. It was fine. There was nothing wrong with it. I think there is kind of a misconception by people that a 3-star book must be a bad book. Like, what you're aiming for is 5-star books, and if you're just slightly below, that's good, but if you're average, you're like bad. Actually, I'd watched a few YouTube videos lately about the whole concept about how 3-star books are not bad. The majority of books you read, I mean, will probably be 3 stars if you're being honest. Sometimes I think that we want to rate everything higher because we want to like have good things. We want to feel like we made good choices. But overall in life, the majority of things are just fine. The majority of things in your day, the majority of things you encounter are okay. They're not amazing. They're not terrible. They just are. And this book definitely falls into that category of it just is. It's in the middle. It's fine. I'm not going to be telling people, hey, you should read this book. But if it's relevant, I would never be like, don't read that book. That book's terrible. I would maybe give them some of the points that I thought were relevant, and there's definitely some things in this book that I would pull out that it can't be a conversation like, hey, Let It Snow is a book that might be right for you. So I think that it very much deserves a 3-star, but I also think that it's a good 3-star book, you know? So now, let's look at the reading shawl, because we got to add a new yarn in, and this yarn is very exciting for me because it's a new yarn to me. This yarn, I'm looking in my bag here that I made to get out my yarn. This is the first time I've ever used Madeline Tosh. This is Madeline Tosh Silk Merino, which is a 50 silk, 50 merino blend in the color Flash Dance. It was gifted to me for my birthday from Carla, and this color, as I was working on it, it looks different in every kind of light, but in the light where I did the majority of this, like I was sitting in my parlor in front of the fire with the Christmas lights that are on our ceiling on, so it was like dark, but it was perfectly wide enough to see. So I'm putting this in and it looks one color, and the next morning I pull it out because I went to bed before finishing the last row of the shawl, and when I pulled it out I was like, oh my goodness, Kendra, this is Kendra hair color. So apparently my hair is the color Flash Dance at its best. Well, actually it probably would have just a few more pops of like pink in it if it were like the best of my hair color, but I digress. So here is what it looks like. The way that I've been working the shawl, if you do not know already, I feel like I keep saying the same thing. So if you're here all the time for all of these, apologies that I'm so repetitive and redundant and repetitive and redundant. That's a thing that we say around here. Okay, so what I'm doing is I have different yarn for each kind of book that I experience. So there are books that I experience with my children. There are books that come from my Life's Library subscription service. There are audiobooks that I just experience by myself without my kids. There's ebooks or physical books. I decided that both of them, because I had to read words just printed on a thing, and it's a different experience than an audiobook, that they're just going to count as the same thing. So that is this section. There is a pattern section for each color, like a different kind of pattern that I'm doing. And then after I do the pattern section, I do however many rows of textured single crochet to delineate the number of stars the book received. So you can kind of see through the striping how much I enjoyed various books over time. So here we have the newest edition, and it is lovely. It was great to work with. My overall impressions of working with the Madeline Tosh Silk Merino was, I don't know, like I feel like people talk up Madeline Tosh like it's the most amazing thing, and at least this particular blend, I mean, it was not bad. But this other yarn, this one here, is from Cattails, and it's a silk merino blend, though hers is 75 merino, 25 silk. I honestly did not notice that big of a difference in the experience of using the yarn. I do know there is a difference in the price point of the yarn, so that is worth noting, that maybe you don't need to pay for a big name if what you want is a quality experience. But I know some people like the name and it makes them happy, and if paying for a label you can look at brings you joy, then more power to ya. I am glad that I got to experience this. I'm like, again, it's lovely yarn, but there's lots of lovely yarn, and it doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg. So this is where I'm at. How big is the shawl gonna end up ultimately? I don't know, but I've already read a ton of books. Like I'm averaging well over one a week for the year, so we'll see how big this ends up or what I end up doing. Pretty soon here I'm gonna have to make some choices and change some things, because I'm gonna run out of yarn, I think. So that's a good problem to have. Good problem indeed. Anyways, if you would like to see more of these Yarn Tales videos, there is a playlist here on the channel of all of the chapters of this year's Yarn Tales shawl, as well as the Yarn Tales shawl that I did last year. And if you would also like to see more of these videos, I would subscribe down below, because I do post my content intermittently. There's not like a schedule. So if you want to make sure you don't miss anything, that is the best way to just have it pop into your subscription feed whenever I get around to posting it. And I will see you all later. Bye.